Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL Jibber Jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
The guys are ready, so let's hand over to Rob Rose, JB, PB and Aldrin, and get on with the show.
So hi gents.
Hi Rob.
Hi Rob.
Nice. We are back together as a quartet to talk about, for me, what is probably one of the most surprising and for some teams alarming week of NFL action in a long time. So we get to recap that and also try and make sense of what on earth will go on with this week's slate of games and see which four teams we're going to nominate for the win and therefore put in Club Dub. But look, before we get into that, what on earth could your takeaways be from a week of just utter mess and madness that seemed to turn so many great NFL narratives completely on their head? Well, Aldrin, you're going to be kicking us off as our returning superstar. Hope Mexico was good, sir. What were your takeaways from last week in the NFL?
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. It was entirely predictable, run-of-the-mill games. Nothing, jumps out. It was, I don't really know where to begin with it. It was bizarre, wasn't it? There was so many kind of topsy-turvy games. I think the game that stands out for me the most, just that really went against the grain, was the Bills against the Jags. That was ridiculous. Who would have thought that the Bills would come into that and score, what was it? Did they score 6 points and the Jags scored 9? So that, I don't know where that Jags defensive performance came from or where that Bills offensive performance came from, but yeah, wholly bizarre. And then, that was just the kind of the tale of the week, wasn't it? Like all of the games were a bit topsy-turvy. The Chiefs and the Packers, I don't know, decided to be the two worst teams in football for a game. That was odd. And yeah, just so many of those sorts of, I don't know, odd feel of games, like even the 49ers and Cardinals game. You kind of look at that and come into it and go, okay, well, the Cardinals have got no D-Hop, no Kyler Murray. Okay, well, this is going to be a slog. And then they just absolutely bulldozed the 49ers. So, yeah, for me, just a real topsy-turvy week.
JB, add to that.
I'm come into sort of this week's review of last week with a similar question to, I think, what I've had every week. Who's good? Or better, maybe is a better question. Who is consistent? Because aside from referees making bad calls, there isn't a team that's consistent in this league. You're right. We watched the Packers and the Chiefs, a game that at the start of our recording last week, I think all four of us were really excited for. And then it was awful. Like, imagine how bad it could be if you haven't watched the highlights. It's worse. You've got unexpected, like Aldrin said, like unexpected performances. The Jags over the Bills, the Giants over the Raiders, I think was a bit unexpected. The Vikings taking the Ravens to overtime. And I will, but the amount of flags in games is such a deciding factor in so many things. I was incredibly vocal on the flag that wasn't for the Ravens against the Lions. So I therefore need to be as equally adamant about the flag on Cassius Marsh that gave the Steelers enough of an advantage to be able to score the game-winning field goal last night. It's absolutely bonkers. And it does feel at times like it's not which team is better. It's which team is able to not only overcome their own mistakes, but the mistakes of people outside of their own control and actually win. I will shout out the Cardinals, as we like to do at the moment, because going into a game with no DeAndre Hopkins, no AJ Green, no JJ Watt, and no Kyler Murray, and still, I think, absolutely outclassed and won and showed that you've got to be, if you were an Arizona Cardinals fan and if you had a podcast where you were maybe talking about football, maybe you would be talking about, are we going to see the Cardinals on a very special night in February?
I'm trying genuinely not to get too excited about that, but I think we have to be considered amongst the contenders. One of the things that I think is most impressive about the Cardinals is how well Cliff Kingsbury is coaching them and how well we're starting to game plan for some of these very difficult teams to plan against, the 49ers and the Rams in the division. And there's been a number of other big games with non-division opponents where I just think he's got it spot on. And whether it's that we've got the right blend of experienced players, locker room leaders, whatever you call them, I don't know. But remember, this is a college coach that, for all of the hype about him being a great offensive mind, has really started to take more of an interest in special teams and defense. And also, I mean, as a college coach, never had a winning record. I mean, I think we're on for something far better than that. So yeah, nice shout out about the Cardinals, JB. PB, your takeaway from last week, please.
I think the flag in last night's game, Steelers and Bears, I get it was soft, and the whole thing about the referee kind of backing into him to have contact with a player is weird. Like, what was that about? But the flag itself, he did his little celebration and then he walks towards the Steelers bench, the Steelers sideline, staring them down because he was released, wasn't he, by the Steelers, I think, originally. So they're told not, to specifically call taunting. It was a stupid play. It was a really, really soft penalty, don't get me wrong, but it was a stupid play. And
I don't know, stuff like that, though. I just think, at what point do you take all emotion out of the game? Like, where do you? I
agree. I
don't
disagree with you at all. Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I think you're absolutely right. Aside from that, it was an odd week. Aside from the Cardinals, it was good for the Buccaneers. As a Buccaneers fan, it was good for them to be on bye, with the Cowboys losing, Packers losing, Rams losing, Saints losing to the Falcons as well. A real good week and a strange week. Who'd have had the Bills to lose to the Jags? And if you look at that division now, it's all to play for with them playing the Patriots twice. The Patriots only need to win maybe one of those games. If you look at the strength of schedule, I think the Patriots have got a much easier run in than the Bills do. The Bills have still got to play the Bucs, the Saints, the Colts, who are going to be fighting for playoff position. So it's, I tell you what, you could see the Patriots coming back to win that game. It's a real strange one. Win that division, sorry.
I think the big thing that we need to talk about is Josh Allen's regression back to kind of the line.
What are you talking about? Josh Allen had an amazing game.
Yes, that is true.
Sack,
Josh Allen.
Forced fumble recovery. Yeah, come on, be clear.
Josh Allen, brackets, quarterback, is the regression. We spent a lot of time last year, obviously not on the podcast, but like individually when we were talking about games, talking about how well his performance was. We did spend a good chunk of time on the podcast when we were talking about what we were excited about for this season, kind of seeing if Josh Allen could build upon the fantastic performance he put in last year. And based on that, no. And that's really where the Bills are suffering.
See, I don't think you can really take too much from last week at all. I mean, you've got Josh Allen. Actually, forget Josh Allen individually. I thought the Buffalo Bills, that must be as bad a performance as they've had in the Sean McDermott era. You kind of look at the Jags, who actually, with the exception of Josh Allen, weren't particularly brilliant. I mean, JB, I sat with you on Sunday watching NFL football, and we were talking about, at what point does Trevor Lawrence at least show something? I mean, I actually think if you were to look at the Bears last night, for as much as they were very poor for a couple of quarters against the Steelers, you feel like Fields is flashing, right? You feel like you're getting these glimpses of the player he could become. And I'm still not seeing that from Trevor Lawrence. It's this weird thing where, you look at all the press coverage of Lawrence and you get, he's got great arm talent. But how many people are still basing their assessment of his NFL future on his college career? And I appreciate how stellar that was. But I mean, he's been given the reins. He's been given a number of games now to get this show rolling. And for me, the wins they've had have not really showcased his talent yet.
Not been because of him, have they? Those wins haven't been because of him.
Well, exactly. And as much as I'm also not blaming him for the losses, I think I think it's a really unbalanced roster around him. But you're just looking for those plays, aren't you? Those moments where you go, oh, God, this guy's going to be something. And I think Fields is suddenly starting to have a few more of those. I think Mac Jones, as much as you feel that the Patriots are being elevated by coaching and great game planning, and the Patriots have got enough talent to beat mediocre teams, and teams who can do that make the playoffs every year. But yeah, I'm just waiting for some flashes from big names. But yeah, I mean, how good are the Titans? How bad are the Rams? How good are the Ravens? How bad are the Vikings? I mean, how good are the Giants? How bad are the Raiders? I mean, it is one of those that really throws everything up in the air. And all of a sudden you can see a team putting a run together, really, really having a chance to make the playoffs. And who knows from there with how inconsistent even the best teams have been. So what a week in the NFL. If you follow it, I can only imagine you loved it. Hopefully there wasn't heartbreak for your particular team. But if that's us trying to make sense of an utterly senseless and nonsensical week in the NFL, let's try and add some greater structure to our game picks of the week and who we're going to nominate to go into Club Dub. So our rules of engagement mean that, Aldrin, you are going first. Give us your pick of the week, sir, and tell us where you think the key battle lines are.
So my game this week is a team coming off bye of the Seattle Seahawks against the Green Bay Packers. And the reason I picked this game is really because it's the game of the quarterbacks that we might see or we might not see ultimately, because you've got a potential kind of blue chip quarterback battle, which could be Russell Wilson against Aaron Rodgers, or we could be looking at, Geno Smith trotting out for the Seahawks and Jordan Love for the Green Bay Packers. So I just think it's a fascinating game because of the possibilities of it and who might come back and who we might see. I think Aaron Rodgers, the earliest he could rejoin the team pending negative COVID tests throughout the week would be Saturday. So regardless of his status, Jordan Love will be the presumptive starter and will take all of the first team snaps in practice this week. And then you've seen Russell Wilson come back, and they've had that bye for the last week, which has given them that extra opportunity to get him back fit. And he's posted some videos of himself working out and being back in training, flinging the ball. So I just think it'll be a fascinating matchup because both teams, without their stellar quarterback, have been pretty flat, pretty uninspiring in offense, not able to move the ball. I think, I don't know if it puts Aaron Rodgers in perspective when Jordan Love was so poor at the weekend. I think he looks like a deer in headlights. And I think, if that guy was worried that, if Aaron Rodgers, was worried that Love was going to take his job, I think that game has probably sealed it for another year at least, to say that Aaron Rodgers is going to be the starting quarterback because he looks well out of his depth at the moment at the NFL level. Equally, Geno Smith, somewhat efficient, not terrible in relief of Wilson, I guess. Still effective enough for them to get a win or two here and there, but certainly not the connection, the excitement, the offense that Wilson gives them. So for me, I just think it's a fascinating matchup of who we might see or who we might not see, really.
There's an amazing kind of thing here for me, and I'm going to touch on it a bit because I've got the Chiefs to talk about later on, where for as much as you look at that game between the Packers and the Chiefs and you think, ultimately a game between two NFL heavyweights, right? Or at least what we'd have thought going into this season. Yeah. That Chiefs secondary is not good. I talked about, was it Sorensen we picked out last week who made another big error for ultimately the best drive of the Green Bay game, the touchdown. I mean, I just think if you can't move the ball against that secondary, you've got significant problems. But equally, you're talking about one side of the Aaron Rodgers issue. You're absolutely right. The earliest he could be back is Saturday. But do we not think there's a chance that the NFL might take action even if he was to get these negative COVID tests? I mean, it seems a really bizarre situation where he's obviously infringed a number of NFL rules when it comes to COVID, but him being found out has only led to multiple other teams getting in touch with the NFL to actually get full detail on what these rules are. I mean, it feels like this could go so many different ways. It could be brushed under the carpet for the fear that it would just be so messy and ultimately have the ability to disrupt the season. But in a season where, let's say, Aaron Rodgers was suspended, maybe misses a couple of games, you made a really good point about Love looks not good enough, certainly for somebody who's been, backing up and learning behind a quarterback of Aaron Rodgers' quality. But equally, this feels as close as we've been probably ever to Aaron Rodgers maybe playing his last Packers games. I mean, I think there are big implications that come down the road for this team. On the flip side, I think Russell Wilson back could be really big for the Seahawks. They've not been a disaster. They are, still with an outside chance of getting themselves in the mix. But yeah, for me, I think the Aaron Rodgers question is a bigger question than does he play Sunday?
I think for me, it comes down to whether Rodgers does play as to how this game goes. I think, Jordan Love, as you said, a bit like a deer in the headlights. But let's be fair, his first game is in a loud Arrowhead Stadium. Again, albeit against a Chiefs team that's not great at the moment and, didn't look great again at the weekend. I don't know.
All he had to do was put up 14 points to win that game. That's kind of my point, is that all you have to do is get 2 touchdowns in a game against an abysmal Chiefs secondary.
Yeah. But then they still didn't have all their playmakers playing, did they? So I don't know. I mean, it's his first. Let's give him a little bit of rope. It's his first NFL start in a noisy stadium that he's never experienced before. His girlfriend and his mum were sat up in the nosebleeds. They couldn't even get him, a low down seat. Is probably playing on his mind. I don't know. Let's see how he gets on in his next start. But I think, it's not looking good in this game if Rodgers doesn't play. On the other side of the coin, it looks like Russell Wilson will be back. And I think that makes the Seahawks a bit of a different animal. And I think it's now at the point where they're make or break for their season as well. We know that they're in a tough division. We know the Cardinals are flying. We know that the Rams look good, albeit obviously they lost this weekend. But the Seahawks are 3-5, and I think if they lose to the Packers and go 3-6, you can count out any kind of playoff aspirations. If they can get to 4-5, then they're still in the mix. So I think it's probably a bigger game for them than it is the Packers, and it's all about the quarterbacks. If Wilson's back and playing, it gives the Seahawks a chance. If Love is playing instead of Rodgers, it gives the Seahawks a bigger chance. But if Rodgers is playing, I can't see anything else but a Packers win, I think.
Yeah, I think to me this Packers Seahawks feels very, very different to those old Packers Seahawks games that we look forward to when you'd think about, it's the follow up to the Fail Mary and the replacement refs and all of that kind of stuff. And kind of coming in last on this point is really just kind of in agreement with all of you. I think the Packers at the weekend lost to potentially the worst Chiefs performance that we have ever seen in the Patrick Mahomes era, potentially even in the Andy Reid at the Chiefs era. Like I'm sorry to Chiefs Kingdom, but your boys just weren't it at the weekend. And I think a lot of that does have to go on Matt LaFleur. Because I think, yes, Jordan Love maybe didn't rise to the occasion like some people were hoping, but I don't think it never felt like the Packers were set up to succeed. And maybe it rang a little true when you kind of look and think how much Aaron Rodgers on the football field does contribute to making the Packers the kind of the team that they are. And I think it's going to be very interesting if Aaron Rodgers is able to trust the science and get back on the field. From his Seahawks point of view, you're getting Russell Wilson back, which has to be a boost to everything because, again, like Geno Smith was fine. They went 1-2, which was probably still better than some people were expecting. Sorry, Geno. And it's going to be, well, how actually back is he? Is he ready to go? Is he ready to kind of lead that Seahawks team? But at the same time, the Seahawks aren't the Seahawks that we've been expecting either. The defense doesn't look as good. For as confident as some members of the team are to their standing in the nation, they aren't really showing it at the moment. And it all kind of, again, feels a little bit like it's on Russell Wilson's shoulders to make things happen. And if he can't do that at the weekend, then, it's not going to be pretty.
One thing I would like to chime in before you pick who's going into Club Dub. I did see something this week that said next time Rodgers is down hurt on the field, maybe they should call on Joe Rogan rather than the team doctor.
Yeah, give him some horse tranquilizers, he'll be fine.
So I think you've picked an interesting game. I'm not sure, it's an easy one to pick a winner for with so many question marks, as we've just said, about who starts at quarterback, who plays, who doesn't. But Aldrin, it's going to be down to you. The first team this week going into Club Dub is...
I'm putting the Green Bay Packers into Club Dub.
The Green Bay Packers, the first team this week in Club Dub. And for those not particularly well initiated with the NFL, we should mention Jamal Adams is the player JB refers to, declaring himself the best in the nation, when he's in fact a pretty average safety in the National Football League. But good for the Seahawks, who wouldn't want to believe the hype. So Aldrin, if you've put the Packers rather controversially into Club Dub with everything that swirls around them, PB, I'm going to throw over to you for our second game. And which tie have you picked, and talk us through the highlights and lowlights?
So in a late change to my previously scheduled pick, I've gone for the Browns at the Patriots. And the reason I've gone for this game is actually a little bit of breaking news in that the Browns have got some COVID issues again. So potentially it looks like Nick Chubb isn't going to be playing. Kareem Hunt is already out. There's one other running back who I think is on the COVID list as well. So it leaves Dernis Johnson as their only fit running back. And I know he had a bit of a career night, earlier in the season when everybody was out as well. But, it's coming up against a tough Patriots defense, and they started off the season not so well. But I think lately, they've started to look pretty good again. They've got J.C. Jackson, Mr. INT, as he's now known, having picked off a few good interceptions this year. And I just think they've got a little bit of swagger about them again that maybe was missing over the last kind of season and a half. And with the Bills losing to the Jags, it's almost like that division is up in the air again. I think the Patriots have not had a bye week yet, so they're 5-4, and the Bills have had their bye week and are 5-3. So it's kind of advantage Bills. But if you look at the strength of schedule over the remainder of the season, I think the Patriots have probably got the easier running than the Bills do. So you're coming back to the Browns game, the Browns are a little bit up and down. And now with the COVID issue kind of affecting maybe their main threat, Chubb got 2 touchdowns at the weekend. And I would say that they're a run first team. There's certainly some concern is maybe too strong a word, but there's some reason to doubt Mayfield's, ability at getting the ball around. Obviously, we all know that OBJ is now gone. Whatever the differences were there, he wasn't getting the ball. Mayfield wasn't getting him the ball, whatever. It's not a kind of, it may be a more harmonious camp now, but it's not been an ideal situation for them. Albeit they got a big win against the Bengals team that 2 weeks ago, we were thinking we're going to be slam dunk division winners the way they were playing. So it's an interesting one. I think it's going to be a really good game, but I think it could be a low scorer. I think the Patriots defense, is going to be the real decider of this one. I think, whether they can contain whatever running the Browns do have, whether Chubb does manage to play. If he has 2 negative tests within 24 hours, I think he can play because he's vaccinated. So he's obviously not been following the Joe Rogan advice. But if he can play, they're an entirely different animal. But if he can't, and the Patriots can stuff that run, then, Mac Jones is kind of getting that offense done and doing what they need to do. Ramondre Stevenson had a good game at the weekend. So I think it's going to be a real interesting game. And potentially we're waiting to see where OBJ turns up. They've got until 4 p.m. today, but there's a lot of talk about the Patriots maybe claiming him. What a storyline that would be if they could get OBJ in the building before the weekend, and his first game back is against the Browns. I guess that remains to be seen. But I think it's going to be interesting and a good one. and whichever team loses, their season's going to go the wrong way. The team that wins, it's a potential playoff team.
Is it just me that finds both of these teams really dull? I hate to say it, but I find both offenses really boring.
It depends what you find dull. I mean, Mac Jones put the old Ken Shamrock ankle lock on Brian Burns at the weekend, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can cheat. Anyone can cheat and throw a check down. Like, I want to see something interesting.
See, I don't know. I'm not willing to call as weird as this is, I'm not willing to call the Browns boring. I think the Browns are quite interesting. There's a part of me that just always thinks that just want to watch what Baker Mayfield's going to do, because you've got to think it's always going to be interesting. But to go, I think to pick on kind of a little bit of what Phil's talking about, I think the Browns are obviously going to suffer. They've only got one running back on the books right now, and do they have enough time to add a second or even a third? That's going to be interesting. I think if Jarvis Landry or some of their more speedier wide receivers are fit and ready, then we might see a lot of like jet sweeps and wildcats maybe and things like that to try and get Kevin Stefanski being a bit creative. From a Patriots point of view, I was really happy for the Patriots to not be good again, because it was just nice to just not have the Patriots constantly in the mix. It was just refreshing. And we had it for just a little bit, and now it's been taken away from us again by the fact that actually they're not as bad as maybe we thought they're going to be. I still kind of agree with Aldrin. I still think they're absolutely bland and there's nothing interesting or likable about them. Sorry, Patriots fans. I'm sure you all like them. But yeah, I'm kind of hoping that this is a bit of a shellacking, and we kind of see the Browns rebound from adversity yet again and kind of really put it on them and show what the Browns are capable of. Because I think I talked about the Battle of Ohio last week and how it was going to be an interesting time for both teams to show what they were made of. And the Browns kind of went, no, don't count us out yet. And it'd be really interesting to see if they can kind of build on that from there.
I think there's a few things for me about the Patriots. Firstly, they are elevated by coaching. I mean, for all those people who say, oh, look at Belichick without Brady and so on, he always seems to be able to organise a defence so they're better than the sum of their parts. And if you've got a defence that are turning over the ball, I mean, turnovers are so important in today's NFL. And I think that offence has not only just enough. I mean, I'm kind of with Phil. You made this point earlier, Phil. I think if the Patriots they'd have to be stellar. If they beat the teams you would expect them to beat, I think they're on the cusp of the playoffs. With the extra wild card, I think they're on the cusp of the playoffs, and I think they're a good enough team to give, pretty good teams a game. I'm not sure I've got them going deep in the playoffs in my mind, but still maybe they're better than I expected. The second element, really, when it comes to Patriots football, is I don't think you can really doubt now that they made the right decision going with Mac Jones over Cam Newton. No, I'm not a huge Mac Jones fan. I mean, I'm with the point that I think you made first here, Aldrin. They're not an electrifying offense. They're built a lot around the run, tight end, quite balanced actually in the way they operate. But do you know what? They have got dimensions that they didn't have with Cam last season. I thought they looked very laboured with Cam Newton, and I think they're more interesting than that this year. And also, I mean, we said we've seen flashes from Fields. I think Mac Jones is probably so far the most consistent, JB, to take a word you used earlier, of the rookie quarterbacks. I think he could be the only rookie quarterback to make the playoffs this year. And I think that would be a huge achievement for Belichick and co if they do that. The Browns, I mean, the one thing, I mean, there was a point made about whoever wins this game's in good shape, whoever loses it maybe isn't. I actually think the Browns are fine, because I think when they get their best players back, I think they've got too much for an awful lot of teams. And do you know what? I don't think you'll need but much better than an even record. I suppose the even record without a tie now is not a possibility in a 17-game season. But I don't think you're going to have anything particularly amazing, particularly in the AFC, actually, to find yourself in the playoffs. And I think the Browns are pretty much a shoo-in. So PB, put us out of our, well, not misery. Give us the team you're putting into Clubbed Up.
Well, I'm going against the grain, as I seem to normally do with my game of the week. I'm banking on Chubb not playing, and I'm going for the Patriots to get into Club Dub this week.
Two down means two to go. So the New England Patriots join the Green Bay Packers in Club Dub. JB, give us your matchup as we head towards finding out the third team passing through the doors.
I am taking us to the lovely state of California for a California battle, actually. I've got Monday Night Football, the Los Angeles Rams versus the San Francisco 49ers, because I think this is a really interesting game between two teams that maybe aren't what we thought they were and maybe also haven't worked out what they're going to be at the moment. Both of which I think is because of quarterback related issues. I think the Rams had a lot of good success initially. And I'm talking about the Rams there as if they're a bad team. They're 7-2 and they're 7-2 for a very good reason. But I think after years of working with Jared Goff and potentially having more of a restriction maybe in what he felt that he could do, having to think about everything much more tightly and how the Rams were going to run the offense. I think bringing Stafford in has kind of opened things out a bit more for Sean McVay. But the problem with that is you then get games like last week where you had, as a lot of people were putting it on Twitter, the Detroit Matthew Stafford turning up, where there were kind of throws that he was making that you're just watching it and going, what was he doing? Like, it was another one of those games where we're watching a quarterback and asking ourselves the question, what did he think he saw? Because what he did made absolutely no sense. And I have full confidence in the Rams making the playoffs. I don't think that's in any doubt. I don't think this is the start of a disaster and they're going to end up, what would it be, 7-10? I think they're quite comfortable, but I think they probably want to come into this game making a statement. I think all indications at the moment is that Von Miller is going to play next week, which means that defense is going to have a heck of a lot more bite in it than it did previously. And you're now, again, adding in the problem of, well...
Have they traded for 5 years ago, Von Miller, then?
Oh, see, I still think in that Rams defense that Von Miller's still going to contribute because, as I was going to say, it's like, okay, it's fine. We'll just continue to, as most teams have to, triple team Aaron Donald to make sure he doesn't get to we left Von Miller unblocked. And that's going to be a problem. And in much the same way as we were seeing an incredibly strong performance from JJ Watt on a defense where he didn't need to do everything himself, I think Von Miller going into a defense where he's not going to be the star focus is going to help him out dramatically. So that's going to be an interesting thing from the Rams. The 49ers are manufacturing their quarterback problem because they know what the right choice is, and for some reason they're not making it. They're continuing to stick with Jimmy G, and I don't think that's the right call. And at some point this season, I think Kyle Shanahan is going to have to accept that it's time to bring in the new era and it's time to put Jimmy G on the bench. I was about to say permanently, which is maybe a bit more grim than I intended to, but maybe it's just time for Jimmy G to not be the starter anymore. And it is time for the 49ers to start thinking, you know what, this season, not ours. What we need to do is we need to start preparing for next season so we're not in this same kind of situation from there. But at the same time, I'm never quite willing to cancel them out. And it is that Shanahan kind of, that factor, that kind of belief in the creativity that he has and the fact that I would have faith in him turning this around. Like I wouldn't be surprised if the 49ers won, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the Rams dominated. Like, it's one of those games where whatever the result comes out at, I could sit here and think, actually, yeah, I can completely understand how that happened in comparison to several games, like some of which we've already referenced from last week, where you look at the final score and you're just trying to work out, I watched this game happen and I still don't know how this happened.
So I can't see the 49ers winning. I think it is a lot more straightforward maybe than you see it. And I think there's an element you've brought up there, which as much as you're focusing on Jimmy G, let's talk about Trey Lance for a little bit. So one of the things that always screams out to me whenever you think about Kyle Shanahan is the complexity of his offense, how many moving pieces he has in an offense. And also the thing I always remember bizarrely is the complexity of his play calling. I seem to remember a video from before the Super Bowl of Kyle Shanahan with Matty Ice, and they were talking about, playing in the Super Bowl and how they have this remarkably complex play call mechanic. Now, I think that ultimately is relevant here, because if Trey Lance was ready, you put him in. I think Shanahan obviously believes that Trey Lance can, produce, can maybe get experience. But I think the 49ers believe that would be ultimately calling their season. I think Trey Lance coming in means you're probably overall not going to win enough games. Now, I don't actually think they'd win enough games with Garoppolo. I agree with that side of your point. But at what point are the 49ers prepared to give up on this season? Do you know what? We could only be a few days away from Shanahan making that call, I think. The Rams, or more like the Haram Globetrotters, just, I don't know, it's an odd mix for me, because I think the addition of Von Miller was unnecessary. I agree with Phil's point. I don't think he's the player he once was. But then in that defense, I think anyone playing with Aaron Donald is in a better situation than anyone not playing with Aaron Donald. So I think all of those arguments for both sides probably hold water. The Rams, yeah, we can say it was a surprise loss on Sunday to the Titans, but they lost to the best team in the AFC at the moment. A messy AFC and an inconsistent AFC maybe, but they still lost to the best team in the AFC. So let's not imagine that they're not going to take care of far worse teams with relative ease in my book. So, I don't see it as close. Also, I don't think the Rams are maybe this juggernaut that people thought they were at the start of the season. What a defeat to the Cardinals, defeat to the Titans, a few other tight games here and there. But yeah, they're playoff bound for sure.
I think for me, it's a clear-cut win for the Rams here. I think the 49ers haven't looked good in many, if any, games this year. I think they've won a couple of kind of garbage games, really. But if you look back at last week, Kittle, I think, was fumbling the ball. They just don't look smooth on offense. The Niners are at home as well. And the last home game that they won was the NFC Championship game in 2019. They've not won a home game with a crowd since then. Actually, sorry. So that I think they won a game last year with no crowd there, but they haven't won a home game with a crowd since then, which is, when you think about that, is crazy. They're a team that was only, in the Super Bowl a year and a half ago. But yeah, it's looking like they're kind of halfway between having a decent roster and needing to kind of freshen it up and start again. So I just don't see the Niners winning this one at all. The Rams look really good, albeit, they didn't last week, but I think they're certainly a Super Bowl contender. We'll see what impact Von Miller can have. For me, the Rams are going to win this one.
You've got to mention, I know I've just been and didn't, but you've got to mention Deebo Samuel, who I think's had a great year. Kittle, I think, with a couple more. And also, I think the Cardinals are very good when it comes to turnovers and forcing fumbles this season. So I don't think you can necessarily hold that against Kittle. He's one of a number. But yeah, I think Phil's nailed it, I wonder whether the 49ers are trying to refresh when they might need to, rebuild. Maybe a young quarterback will force them to do that. There's some good players, but there's not enough for me. Need better running backs, need better defensive backs. Yeah, there's definitely holes.
Yeah, I think you almost nailed it with your point around Trey Lance maybe not being ready and that being a very complex scheme. I think the only caveat to that is that at North Dakota State, he ran quite a complex NFL style offense. He was adjusting things at the line and making adjustments and all those kind of things. So I think he's got the mental smarts as an NFL quarterback to be able to pick up that offense. Equally, I don't feel like they will throw him in just as the starter because it does call their season, but equally I think it's the way Shanahan works. It's probably more effective to keep Garoppolo as the starter and add in more kind of package plays for Lance. So I think we'll probably start to see more of that. And I think that will help him develop as well.
There is a part of me that's kind of thinking back to the end of the Montana era, which kind of went alongside the start of the Steve Young era, when kind of they were just playing a week on week. Sometimes Joe would start and then Steve would start, and then Joe would start but Steve would play, and then Steve would start, and it just feels like we're very, very close to potentially having that kind of 49ers kind of thing again. I think obviously the difference in that is Joe Montana and Steve Young were swapping around when the 49ers were in the middle of winning 4 Super Bowls.
Yeah, 3 with Montana,
Yeah.
one with
Yes.
Young. Yeah.
Sorry, 4. And the current incarnation of the 49ers are not in the middle of winning much.
No, and also Hall of Famer Joe Montana and Hall of Famer Steve Young are not Hall of Famer Jimmy Garoppolo and no idea Trey Lance. To your point, Aldrin, I agree in the sense that I think Trey Lance is a very smart quarterback, capable of handling complex offenses. I think if the 49ers didn't believe that, they wouldn't have drafted him. I do just think he doesn't have the ability to win the games yet. Yeah, it's just about where they call their season. But you know what?
They probably see it long term as well.
Oh, yeah.
I feel there's no reason to rush him in. I think they've got Jimmy G on the hook for this year. Ride him until the end of the year, because the fact is that the other top 2, let's say the Rams and the Cardinals, clear winners in that division. You're not going to catch them now. So, I mean, why not continue to sit Lance for this year and, feed him in next year and he'll be a better quarterback for it.
Well, you say feed him in next year, and sorry, JB, I will come back to you for your call. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo starts next season at 49er, does he? I just cannot see that at all.
That's what I mean. I think he's
they just ride him
for the
starter
season.
for next season. Trey Lance, yeah. So do you know what? I am handing over to you, JB, because you clearly see this game closer, I think, than any of the 3 of us. So go on, give us your shout for Club Dub.
My pick for Club Dub this week will be welcomed through the doors past the velvet rope with one very, very simple question. Whose house? Rams' house.
Thought you were going to say the 49ers, and if you did, I was ready to fold this podcast as an absolute mockery. Right, okay, so the Rams are going to take care of business, and the Rams are going to find themselves the 3rd team into Club Dub this week, which means you are left with me talking about my game and what ultimately a weird game it is. So I have gone for the game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, so many different angles to this, and one of the routes you could take to this game is you could say, well, the Chiefs come off the back of a win, right? There were no easy wins in the NFL. The Raiders come off the back of a slightly more challenging run of results, and that's before you factor in all of the incredible storms swirling around that franchise this season. I mean, 3 of them in a season that you wouldn't have predicted happening in the NFL, let alone happening to just one team. But there is a problem with all of the things that swirl around the game, which is that when you actually look through all of that, I think the Raiders are a better team at the moment than the Kansas City Chiefs. And let me unpack this slightly. So we talked last week, and PB, you referred to this in our pre-show meeting, that should I pick the Chiefs game when we talked about them at such length last week? Well, last week I said Sorensen and Matthew at safety aren't good enough. They can't stop leaking points. Now, the weird thing is, I think, the Green Bay Packers did them a great favor by being just incredibly average and not particularly adventurous at the weekend. But I still don't hold any faith at all in that Kansas City defense to do a great deal against a good and potent offense. And then the other thing you've now got to look at is what we thought early in the season was an anomaly is now undoubtedly a pattern. If you look at the performance of the Kansas City Chiefs this season, since week 2, right, Patrick Mahomes has only thrown over 300 yards once. At the weekend, he threw 166 yards. Now, look, you were talking earlier, PB, about Baker Mayfield. Well, actually, you look at Baker Mayfield's numbers, they fluctuate. But what Mayfield has got that Mahomes hasn't is a run game. And again, Kansas City have only eclipsed 100 yards running twice this season, so the run game's not going to bail you out. So beyond the splash plays that Mahomes and others, Kelsey and the cheetah, beyond all the splash plays that the Chiefs are clearly still capable of, they do not have the basic fundamental ability to move the ball with a great regularity. And they're also finding, as they labour to move the ball, that they're becoming more and more turnover prone. Now, for as much as I think the Chiefs have got the talent to potentially steady the ship, sort it out, whatever kind of metaphor or phraseology you want to use for that, the Raiders are just a better team. I mean, the Raiders have been able to do things this season with Kenyon Drake that the Cardinals weren't able to do last season. You can go back to our preseason pods where you hear me talk about the fact the Raiders are overpaying Drake, and I still think they are. But whether it's Drake, whether it's Jacobs, whether it's, the kind of backup running backs, that supporting cast, they're finding ways to move the ball on the ground. I think Derek Carr is having undoubtedly his best season. And for me, somewhat scoffing at the game's slowed down for him. He feels more free and easy. He's got greater confidence going into this year. Do you know what? I think he is playing well enough to think that the Raiders could have far too much in their locker for somebody like the Kansas City Chiefs. And the further you go beyond the superstars and you start to get into the supporting cast, I just think the Raiders are a team who are turning up playing better football each and every Sunday. And if you're looking at consistency, JB, I think the Raiders have got far more of it than the Chiefs. Yeah, they lose out to the Giants, who on their day I think can threaten a lot of teams. But I still think they look absolutely like the team that could, win that division.
Adversity can bring a team together. And obviously it's not on any of us to sit here and talk about the issues that certain ex-players for the Raiders have got or anything like that at all. But ultimately, we are here to talk about the people that are left there. And you have to imagine that the people who are left there together have kind of just come together and kind of said, right, this is either going to be the absolute end of what we're trying to accomplish here, or this is just us going to carry on. And based on everything they've done, I think they've kind of said, we're going to carry on and we're going to win. And I do kind of agree with you, Rob. I don't think the Raiders have the same superstar level players that the Kansas City Chiefs have. Like, I don't think if you put them up together, I don't think Derek Carr is as good as Patrick Mahomes. Sorry, Derek, please don't block me on Twitter. I don't think Darren Waller is as good as Travis Kelce or anything like that. However, what I think is the Raiders are a much better team at the moment than the Chiefs are, and the play kind of does show that. And kind of bring an analogy or an example that I always like to come to. It's like when Greece, when was it the European Championships, when they were absolutely categorically nowhere near being any of the best players in the tournament, but they came together and they played fantastically as a team in comparison to sort of the other teams in the tournament who were like, we will count on our superstars to do it. The Raiders are getting fantastic contributions from every position group on their roster, far outside what the expectations were. And that's ultimately, like offense wins games, defense wins championships. The team wins everything. And if your team is coming together and playing at the level that they're on, yeah, they're fantastic. We talk about the Chiefs, I think, quite a bit, and I'm kind of almost reluctant to kind of continue to labour the points that we've made. They've got issues on offense, they've got issues on defense, they've got issues on special teams. If you kind of showed a non-fan the Chiefs last season and the Chiefs this season and said, how much time difference is there between these two performances? I think they'd be stunned if you said, no, this is just the next year. And they've absolutely got to do something to solve that. And I think the Raiders are catching them at the right time. I think, yes, they won last week and the Chiefs won back-to-back games for the first time this season, but that doesn't really mean anything. I think I said to Rob when we were watching the games, either this week or last week, at what point do we have to start talking about the fact that the Chiefs aren't going to pull out of this season and we're not going to get that fantastic Chiefs team that we thought we were going to get?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on all of that. I think as well, I think as bad as it is to say, I feel like at the minute Mahomes is the problem. I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but it certainly feels like Mahomes is the problem. He's not being, I guess, just not being smart. I think he still seems to be trying to force it a lot when, simple checkdowns are there. Just move the chains a little bit. Don't go for the 60, 70-yard splash play. I think sometimes, I'm not a big fan of Mac Jones, but the way he's moving the offense is just 3-4 yards at a time. And you do that consecutively and you win ball games. And I think Mahomes isn't doing that well. Equally, I don't think the pieces around him are playing particularly well. I think Kelsey's having a real off year. Things are just, I don't know, in a number of cases. I know that Mahomes has been dug out for a number of his interceptions, but equally, the ball's pinging off the hands of normally sure-handed receivers like Kelsey and like Tyreek Hill. So I don't think they're helping him out. I think all in all, they're just in a bit of a funk. And I to your point, James, I don't think they're pulling out of that anytime soon unless something changes and they just go back to basics. On the other side, I think the Raiders are, there are a litany of issues off the field, let's say that. But on the field, I still think they're a pretty sneaky team. They're pretty efficient. I think to the point that I've just countered, Carr is pretty efficient. He moves the ball fairly nicely. He's not the big play, crazy guy that's going to scramble out of the pocket and throw a back shoulder fade and, do a no-look pass and all these kind of things. But he moves the ball well. They've got a decent running back. They've got some decent receivers that can make plays, albeit without Ruggs. That eliminates the kind of burst of speed. But have they just signed Deshaun Jackson? They did this week, didn't they? So I think that replaces that kind of just go route. So I do think they're an efficient team, and I think they're the better of those two teams at the minute, certainly on both sides of the ball. So it's tough to call because I just feel like the Chiefs feel like one of those teams that one game is going to click and they're just going to annihilate a team. But I keep thinking that each week and it's just not happening. So I don't know. I couldn't pick it either way.
If you'd have asked me this before last week's games, I'd have probably said I favour the Raiders and the Raiders are going to win it. But the Raiders just lost to a poor Giants team. And I know, it was a bit of a rough week for the Raiders and they've had a lot of it's not been a smooth season for them at all, has it? It seems to be one PR crisis after another. But I don't know, something's up with the Chiefs, isn't it? Mahomes doesn't look like Mahomes at all. Kelsey has been a little bit off the boil as well. Tyreek Hill, I don't think has looked particularly great either. They won, and held the Packers to barely any points purely because Jordan Love, it was his first game and coming into that environment and not having played as a starter, I think it was quite daunting. But, who knows what would have happened in that game if Aaron Rodgers played. So it's a real tough one to call. I think for me, I've gone with the Chiefs, but it wouldn't surprise me to see the Raiders do it. I think it's a real 50-50 game and you could argue it either way.
I think, and there's not going to be much surprise as to who I'm going to pick to go in Club Dub, right? I think I've already said too much. But I think, Aldrin, you have absolutely. It's funny because you just said, Aldrin, I can see them, one game it just clicking. But I think you've nailed why it won't. The big splash plays only work when the defense has got to watch for those fundamental basic parts of any NFL offense. The ability of a team to be able to run the ball for short to middling yardage, and the ability of a team to, make the short pass game work. And you talked about, the dump offs and the screens and the switch plays. The reality is that when you have no running game, those splash plays become all the more expected. How many times have we seen interceptions where ultimately what Mahomes is throwing is a jump ball because those defensive backs are there. They're understanding that ball's going to be thrown deep and they're not having to pay attention to the shorter runs and the other receivers out on the field. The last 3 games, the Chiefs have barely better than 30% third down conversion rate. I just don't think, they have shown me anything in the last few games that suggests that's a quick fix. And that's before we get onto the defense. So the Raiders I think, Rich and here's me struggling as every NFL commentator seems to have another go at this, but Bisaccia, head coach, ultimately I think has been very quiet. I think he's kept a pretty low profile, and I think he's prepared his teams well, which in the circumstances is exactly what you want. And I think your point, JB, I think you've got a locker room that'll be looking out and rallying around. Do you know what? I think I know I've joked all season that the Raiders buy useless players who are old and past their best. And maybe Deshaun Jackson, in other circumstances would be a player I'd put in that bracket. But do you know what? He does give them a deep threat. If nothing else, he does mean defenses have to be aware. I think it's really straightforward for me. I would be amazed if the Chiefs get anything out of this. I'm putting the Raiders into Club Dub.
One thing that I should have noted on that game is the running game's going to play a part. I don't think the Chiefs have a real running game at the moment. No. And I think Josh Jacobs got hurt, didn't he, against the Giants, and that probably impacted their performance there. So I think if he's healthy, it swings it a bit in the favour of the Raiders. But if he's not, then...
I don't think the Giants, I know when we're going to get into Danny Dimes and all this stuff as always, I don't think the Giants are that bad. I think the Giants are a pretty, they're not a Lions, a Texans, a Dolphins. I think those games can happen. So yeah, I think the Raiders will have too much. But that rounds out our quartet for Club Dub. So who did we have? We had the Packers, the Rams. I've added the Raiders. And who am I missing? Patriots? Yeah, the Patriots make up our foursome. So good work, gents. Those 4 teams in Club Dub. And as regular listeners will know, we end our regular season pods with the week's hot topic. So here's one for you. Can't wait for this. Odell Beckham Jr. has supposedly been putting out noises that if he was to be signed by anyone other than a contender, quite what that is in the mind of Odell Beckham Jr., I'm not sure. You'd probably have had the Browns in that bracket, right? But if he signs for anyone who isn't a contender, he will refuse to play and he will be a disruptive locker room influence, he seems to be saying. So with that in mind, will that put the positive... Well, indeed, yeah, first time for everything. Will that put challengers off, not wanting a team that's already rolling to have a new and potentially disruptive player in the mix? Or will somebody reach out thinking that he could be the final piece of the puzzle? So all I want from you guys, and this can be as scientific or as emotionally based as possible, is who you want to see Odell Beckham Jr. rolling out for in the coming weeks. And PB, I am going to start with you.
Well, I've got some semi-breaking news on this very topic. Odell Beckham Jr. has prioritised the Packers as his number one destination should he clear waivers. So if nobody claims him on waivers, he wants to go to the Packers.
They've just signed Randall Cobb. How would they fit him in?
Well, I mean, it would immediately give them an extra threat, wouldn't it, that they don't have at the moment. But I'd be surprised if no one claims him, to be honest. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Not on that
He's
contract.
on a lot of money. Huge contract.
This season, right?
Also,
I see it out, but who wants to pay that money?
Can we also just focus on Phil saying, yeah, Odell Beckham would give the Packers a threat like they don't have. The Packers, who regularly throw to Devontae Adams.
Well, a secondary threat after Adams. You know, that I know they've got Valdez, Scantling and Cobb, but you know they've lost Tunyon as an example, who was a good option for Rodgers. So I know you know you're not going to replace a tight end with OBJ, but it just gives them a bit more threat.
So do you know what, Phil? You make a really good point, because this isn't something I'd considered. Does OBJ go somewhere as a number 2 then? Is that whether it's the Packers or anyone else, do you see him lining up as the number 2 receiver?
I don't think he's done anything in the past 2 years to go to a team as a number 1 receiver. I think
not if he wants to go to a contender.
If Odell Beckham Jr.'s career finished now, he would be remembered for some spectacular one-handed catches, and that's it. Cleveland didn't work out for him, and he's so far removed from the Giants, where he had a couple of injury-hit seasons. I think he'd be hard pushed to go somewhere as I couldn't name, apart from the Lions maybe, arguably maybe the Jaguars. I can't think of many teams where he'd go and be a number 1 receiver right now.
So you've got him going to the Packers, Phil. That's who you think, with that bit of breaking news, you're going Packers.
Where he suggested he'd like to go. But I mean, if I had to pick a team where I think he'd make a difference, as I suggested earlier, I think the Patriots would potentially make sense for him.
I like that. So the Patriots, with a note on the Packers for PB. JB, where have you got Odell Beckham Jr. going?
So I have 2 options. I have the comedy option and my serious option. The comedy option is also the Patriots, just because as much as we talk about how spectacular Odell Beckham's career has been, let us not forget that he was moved out of the Giants because the Giants decided this guy's too much trouble. He went to the Browns, where he was paired up with Jarvis Landry, and everyone thought, they're all college teammates, they're really good friends, Jarvis will be able to bring out the best in him. And the Browns have decided that he's too much trouble and moved on from him. I would love to hear the stories of Bill Belichick interacting with Odell Beckham Jr. I think that would be comedy gold. My serious pick, if I was going to put Odell Beckham on a team, would be the Tennessee Titans, because I think he would, much like Phil was talking about with his example for the Packers, I think he would add into that air offense, kind of paired up with taking some potentially the pressure of expectation off of Julio Jones, giving Ryan Tannehill a good threat that he can throw to. And again, I also do kind of feel like Mike Vrabel is the kind of coach that would absolutely not put up with any of Odell Beckham's attitude or hijinks. And like we routinely talk about, Vrabel as the kind of guy who looks like he could still line up and put the pads on and take a couple of snaps. So you can kind of just imagine, Odell getting frisky with the kicking net on the sideline and then just turning out and Vrabel's giving him that old WWF clothesline.
WWF. Well, I think we have to say WWE now, don't we? Although we're probably not allowed to say either as a small podcast with no back. And the only thing for me with the Titans, he'd be a number 3 there, surely. At least at Brown, then Jones.
No,
then
I would have
Jr.
Brown. I think realistically, from what we've seen this season, I think it would go Brown, Beckham, Jones.
Taking the pressure off Jones, those 3 catches a week that Julio Jones is turning up, maybe too much for him.
The thing,
if I can lost a running back though. Okay.
If I can make one last pitch for it, we have already seen this season how drastically a team's fortunes can improve when you have a first round pick as your 1, a second or third round pick as your 2, and you bring in a first round pick from another team who several people had expected was maybe on the last legs of his career and wasn't going to perform, but seeing what he can actually do when the pressure's off him.
So for all of our listeners who aren't involved in which teams are you referring to, JB? Or
that would be the Arizona Cardinals bringing in AJ Green. Everyone expected him to kind of be kind of like, he's too injured, he's too frequently injured, he hasn't really got a lot to offer. And actually, there have been games this season where AJ Green has been the difference. And AJ Green, to me, is functioning as the number 3. There's no reason why you couldn't plug Beckham in as the 2, move Julio to the 3. And like we were talking about with Von Miller and Aaron Donald, if you've got, let's say hypothetically, you've got double coverage on either Beckham or Brown, that means there's one of the 2 of Jones, and whichever one you're not double covering has got single coverage, and you've got to expect they're going to win that. So I think it'd be interesting.
So I think for mine, the Patriots have been mentioned already, and I would probably throw the Patriots in for a slightly different reason. That I know Antonio Brown has now put his, I'm going to steal your phrase, JB, I quite liked it, hijinks behind him. But remember that when Antonio Brown was very much seen as damaged goods, the Patriots was where he ended up catching passes from Brady before the two of them reunited in Tampa Bay. And also the Patriots have a bit of form by taking Josh Gordon a couple of times. You know, Josh Gordon again was, high ceiling, but ultimately seen as, nightmarish actually by a number of NFL front offices. And they didn't get huge production out of him, but made it work. I mean, you've even seen it with them taking, so Michael Floyd, who, was ditched by Arizona, again, pretty unceremoniously was picked up in New England. So I just think they're the kind of team that have had swings at these kind of players before. But actually, if I'm going for where I'd love to see him, the Saints, I think would be interesting. I don't think they've got a great amount at wide receiver. I quite like what Callaway does, but he doesn't feel quite as pro-ready as maybe I was thinking with a couple of great performances in the preseason. And also, I mean, Michael Thomas isn't going to be back, right? So they've got a Michael Thomas-sized hole that I think Odell Beckham Jr. goes into. I like, the Saints have had big characters before. I really like the way Sean Payton coaches. Again, I think he's got that Vrabel kind of no-nonsense attitude. Do you know what? And they're doing reasonable things with Simeon. I know that they're not going to have Winston and maybe not an air-out offense between now and the end of the year, but it's somewhere I think could make life interesting. So I'm going to say the Saints would be my pick. Aldrin, round us out. Where does Odell Beckham Jr. wind up in the next few days?
So my pick, and this is based on where I think he would, A, have a good impact, and B, could actually be on a contender and potentially be considered the wide receiver one, which, let's be honest, the guy is probably a bit selfishly wanting to be.
Oh, go
is
on.
James's favourite, the Baltimore Ravens. I think arguably
Ravens.
They don't really have a true top wide receiver one. I think Hollywood Brown, again, shows flashes every now and then, but looks less like Hollywood every game I see him.
What wide receiver Brown, as he should be called, yeah.
And I mean, everywhere, who else? You've got Sammy Watkins, Devin Duvernay, like a litany of bang average wide receiver 3 or 4s at this point in their careers. So I think he could go in there, kind of like the Browns. He wouldn't be expected to do everything because obviously they're heavy leaning on the run. But I think he adds a completely different dimension than what they've got. They're a real strong contender and continue to be week in, week out. And I think, that offense is quite flash and brash, led by Lamar Jackson. I think he wouldn't be an overly disruptive force in there. I think they are quite a brash unit. But yeah, that's where I would put him if I was putting him anywhere.
Another good coach with John Harbaugh there, actually.
Yeah.
And also he'd get to play the Browns. I wonder if that would be something that would appeal. It sounds like the Packers is where he wants to go. I think the Packers have got enough problems already, without involving Odell Beckham Jr. in that mess. But you know what? One of us could be right. Well, probably one of us will be, as we've all had multiple stabs at this, right? But yes, so many of these make sense. It'll probably end up at the Rams, like every other superstar player. They'll probably find cap room somehow. But gentlemen, what an absolutely brilliant pod. Love our 4 picks for Club Dub. Love your insight and just the pure entertainment that this podcast offers. I think you've delivered another barnstormer. And before we go, all that's left to do is for me to hand over to JB. JB, give us the runners and riders in our Pick'em League so far this year. Who won last week?
It was a very close week last week, as on our meeting client, James Aldrin goes nuts. As yes, indeed, James Aldrin has once again found himself at the top of the charts this week with a 9-5 victory. Yep, it was close. Phil and Rob both came in at 8 and 6. I was bottom, and we won't talk any more about how well I did.
How far adrift were you? Because I thought it was the kind of week where I could have very easily ended up like 2 or 3 and something with all the surprises. What did you end up?
I ended up 5-9.
Yeah, that can easily be done in a week like that.
Which is categorically the worst performance any of us have had this season. It went badly.
Well, it wasn't Buffalo Bills bad, JB, so I wouldn't feel too bad about it. In fact, 5-9 is very nearly the score by which they lost. That's the way you got to think about it. Your pick and score was actually nearly how the Buffalo Bills rode out of Jacksonville. But do you know what? It's all to play for. Follow our Pick'em League and throw us your own picks through our various social channels. Send a message to us on Twitter, or what would you be doing? Hitting us up on Instagram? I don't know how Instagram works. Aldrin looks after that. But yeah, find us on our various social channels, and we'll look forward to catching up again with more NFL insight and news in 7 days' time. Great work, gents. See you later.
Cheers,
Thanks,
Rob.
Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over.